Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hope you guys are doing good.
Very well.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. As we present you a fireside chat on on the future of voice technology, presented by Bret Kinsella, founder of VoiceBot.ai, John Stine, executive director at the Open Voice Network, and moderated by Charlie Cadbury, who is the CEO of Say It Now. For all the voice people, Bret Kinsella and John Stine needs no introduction. But for the curiosity of our audience who don't know what they are actually on, they're one of the top voice tech influencers today. We'll let them introduce themselves to you. Gentlemen, the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much. Very exciting to be here. Good afternoon, and good afternoon from London, where I'm sitting with my cup of tea. Now, this session is all about the future of voice technology. Now, I've been very excited about this session. We're going to be digging very deep into the future of voice, but we'll ladder there and attempt to articulate the stepping stones so we can really understand how we can pragmatically bring this vision into reality. Now, just kind of a brief introduction to myself. My name is Charlie Cadbury, and I've always known that this moment would come. As a child growing up in the 80s, I was a big fan of sci-fi. And I was very impressed with the sci-fi writers because they could see deep into the future, and they knew that we would build a world where we'd surround ourselves with intelligent technology in order to help us get through the minefield of life. They also knew that the best way to communicate with all of this technology was going to be through the power of our voice. And we see this all right now. If you're a big fan of Iron Man, you see Tony Stark flying around in his iron suits, and he talks to his AI assistant Jarvis using his voice. He's not using a mobile app. This is all coming here. Now, I spent my whole career in technology. We've been working exclusively in voice for the last 6 years, working with brands like Allegiant Air and Marriott. Right now, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Say It Now, and we use highly targeted audio adverts to drive people into voice experiences to purchase. Now, I met Bret in 2017 in Paris, talking about how you can book trains using Alexa, and we've kept in touch ever since. I'm a big fan of VoiceBot, has been very supportive. And John is very well known to us. We hugely admire his work. And this is our first time actually treading the virtual boards together. He's got more than 30 years retail experience, and he's got a great perspective on how these channels unfold. Now, before we begin, I'd like to invite both of you to take a moment to introduce yourself and your credentials with a specific focus on what experience and expertise you have to draw upon to comment on the future of voice technology. Now, first over to you, please, John.
Well, Charlie, thank you for the introduction and the kind words. And let me say this. I aspire to the level of influence and leadership of Bret Kinsella. In fact, talking about the future of voice with Bret is like discussing theology with Moses. You know, it's the kind of thing you need to sit at his feet as opposed to, have a conversation. That being said, I bring 30 years of technology and retail experience to this conversation, and really from the Open Voice Network's perspective, and from the perhaps the lens that I might most bring to this conversation is that of the users of voice technology. What do they need? Where are they going? What are the changes in the ecosystem, in the technology, in the experience, in the business value? How is all that unfolding? And so look forward to the conversation. And again, Charlie, thank you for the introduction. It's just great to be here with Bret.
Well, thank you. I would just have to say that you really rose expectations to a level that I'm not sure I'll be able to make. I am no Moses. I'm not taking you to the promised land. But I will say that I have been in this space for a long time now, or relatively long, since 2013. We started out in the advertising side, actually, with mobile apps. This was pre-Alexa. It was post-Siri, but pre-Alexa. Was with an organization. We were building the very first interactive audio ads, voice interactive audio ads. And they would just activate through mobile streaming, like in the United States, it was NPR, and we worked with some of the other big streaming services, which everybody knows, some radio stations as well. And that led into a couple of years later, me founding VoiceBot.ai, because I recognized, based on all the people who kept asking me for information, that there was a gap there, that the industry needed somebody, some organization to come in and do this. And I didn't intend to do it. I just started doing it a little bit and it snowballed from there. But I had enough context. I've been in the tech world since the mid-90s. I've been through the web and mobile and social and RFID and a bunch of these other cycles. And so when I saw voice come about, when I was working in the midst of it, and then I saw what was going on with Alexa and Google Assistant, actually it was before Google Assistant came out, but Alexa to a certain extent, I recognized a pattern. And I said, okay, this is something that we can take some of the things we knew and we can apply them here, and that'll be helpful to the industry. But I also recognized there were some differences. There were some pattern disruptions that were going on. And I really thought that most of the conversation was really just focused on speeds and feeds, as we would say, the features of products. And it wasn't really around this idea of new business models, the enabling of new functionality. And so we founded the business around breaking through all that clutter, doing the analysis, primary research, both on the technology side as well as the consumer side, and really understanding what this means from an adoption standpoint, what this is going to mean from a business model standpoint. And we continue to do that. We're the number one website, news organization, and research focused organization in the world on voice AI technology. And I say that without hesitation at this point, because I think we're really the only ones who focus on this at this point. There's other people who come in and out around it, but we have really dedicated all of our efforts to this space because we think it is so important. And that's, I guess that's what I bring to the conversation. So many years working in the industry, building, but also as an analyst.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, I think it'd be useful to start. This is the future of voice technology, and I think we're going to try and push out into a vision of where we think this is all going, and then we'll ladder back to make sure that we understand the steps that are required to get there. So I'd like you to open your minds and then think about how people will be using, as a kind of day-to-day examples, voice technology in the year 2030. And if you can both kind of run through how you think this is going to kind of impact people's journeys through their day, it'd be really interesting to get your viewpoint, and then we can ladder back. If we start with you, Bret.
Okay, so the question is 2030, how is voice technology going to be used?
Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, this is sort of an easy one. It'll be ubiquitous. So if we look at this idea of mobile, there was a time when we came into mobile and it was not expected that you have a mobile capability as an organization, as a media brand, as anything else. It was just like, oh, some people have mobile apps. And that was really the only way to get in. But over time, what happened was the tools evolved. And so then you had this option of having a mobile app, or you have mobile responsive web at the very least. And there's sort of an expectation that everyone who has a digital presence, that's going to be available in a mobile format, right? In some way. So that's the expectation. And I believe that voice will be there, will be to that level well before 2030 is this UI feature. And then it goes beyond that, and there's new capabilities that are implemented. But that's sort of the mundane, right? I think that's something that most people could look at and say, yes, that seems like a logical progression. At the very least, for convenience, there's sometimes when this is important, but also for some of these more complex interactions, which are just 10 times more efficient using voice than they are any other types of input mechanism, sort of the manual world that we're stuck with, whether it be touch and swipe or input. I think the more interesting things are going to be twofold. One is I absolutely believe we're going to have true assistants that have agency. And when we say agency, that means they can do things on our behalf when we are not present, whether it be online or potentially in the real world. And we see some glimpses of this today. They're not personalized, they're generalized, but we're going to see a lot more of these. So we're all going to have our assistant. So there was a time when executives on Madison Avenue and elsewhere all had their executive assistant that basically helped manage their life and take care of a lot of the things that they would. And those assistants would not only respond to requests, but they would do things proactively because they anticipated the needs, they understood the needs. And so this is absolutely something that is going to happen. And we're talking about absolutely a 10x better solution than we have today, which is the self-service world. We've gone from this world where we had people helping us and people had roles and functions to no, you can do it all yourself. And that's okay for a lot of things. I love that evolution. However, it's a lot of cognitive load, and actually it's more time and more time and more time that's put in front of us. The tools we have are wonderful, but there's a lot more things that we need to do. So we'll have these assistants. And the second thing I would say is, and a lot of people who follow voicebot.ai will recognize this. I've been really talking a lot about these virtual humans, virtual beings. I think it might be a better way to do it. As Edward Sachi from Fable Studio would talk about them. This idea of the solutions that we're going to be interacting, which are going to not only have conversational ability, but they'll have some sort of visual representation as well. Because we all know that a significant portion of communication is visual as well as auditory. So we need to be able to have that. So we're going to see that first in a lot of organizations, which will have this type of presence for things like customer service or to help people choose a product. But we're also going to see those having their own experiences and actually building personalities. And there'll be an entertainment aspect, and there might actually be a utility aspect to those as well. And we will see those manifested both on the Web 2, as we talk about today, but also in Web 3, where we're going to see a lot more innovation in this space around the metaverse.
Excellent. I'm so glad you said the word metaverse. We won't have time to play there today. But John, if you're able to kind of paint a picture of your 2030 now.
Let me just, in fact, I'm just going to add and just paint around the edges of what Bret so well said. I think there's several phrases that are guiding us, and certainly we are informed by Bret's research. So make that clear. That's a starting point for us. But when we talk to futurists, and futurists describe to us the world of billions, ambient, ubiquitous, everywhere artificial intelligence, and then tell us and use the phrase that every AI will be conversational. Every AI in the world of billions of AIs out there will be conversational. We talked to Professor Monica Lamb at Stanford. She has the vision of a worldwide voice web, which is another way of if you will, predicting this future. Again, ambient, ubiquitous, everything conversational. We are speaking, it is speaking to us. It is listening to us. And as Bret pointed out, the personal AI assistant moves toward the interface moves toward the personal AI assistant. And it begins to be one. There will be the virtual Charlie, the virtual Bret, the virtual John, and God, please, may the virtual John be better looking than the one that exists today. It's
Not
all
possible.
on its way. It's coming. Oh, my God. Please, may it be so. I think there's also a couple other things, Charlie, and just, again, painting around the vision that Bret had. 8 years from now, that's 2030. By that time, and may it be so, voice and all that voice means, technology, is a standard line item within the enterprise. It's not, ooh, we need to test it. It's no, oh, goodness, what do we do with the data? It is in an interoperable, standards-based, open world where, to Bret's vision of a year ago, 18 months ago, Bret, you had the slides, general purpose platforms and specific, company function-specific agents all working together. In 8 years, voice is going to be a natural, a normative, a regular investment at major enterprises, major and small enterprises. It's going to be a tool for communications, for operational efficiency, and the like. We will move in these 8 years to that reality. A worldwide voice web, a world of AI where every AI is conversational, and a world where voice is an enterprise tool. We move from today's toy through the valley of despair that Gartner points to this is a tremendously valuable tool.
Excellent. I think we've got a beautiful image of this being a certainty, this being incredibly valuable, and it's not too far away. I think it's worthwhile kind of coming back to where we stand today, and if you kind of think about the maturity of the technology, where do you think this stands in terms of kind of evolution and life cycle? We're a mature adult, we're a crawling child. Can this stand on its own 2 feet yet? Where do you think on that kind of that path we stand right now, John?
I think there's several ways to look at it, Charlie. And again, Brett's going to be the expert here. But I think, you take a look at the Gartner hype cycle, voice is on the downward slide. And largely because it's in the early gawky adolescence. It stumbles over itself. It may not be able to do what it wants to do. And the gap between reality and envisioned promise, that vision out there, is rather large. Nonetheless, for what it does, tremendous value can be created. Working in the call center, tremendous value can be created. Providing inventory information, say in retail, tremendous value. The ad type things that you're doing, Charlie, tremendous value. So there are places where there is value, but broadly overall, it's in the adolescence. And it's at a childhood level, because I think we have to look at it from the technology side, the enterprise adoption and trust side, the user side. There's multiple perspectives in which we'll gauge the maturity. It maybe is in the child level at the enterprise trust and use side. Again, technology is moving ahead, great things in front of us, maybe early adolescence and gawky adolescence. Bret?
I might break that analogy a little bit, but go back to the one that you started with the hype cycle. I would say that maybe we've been through the trough of disillusionment on a macro level, and we're sort of on the slope of enlightenment. For those of you who know the Gartner hype cycle, we've been through the peak of inflated expectations. However, I think you were alluding to this, John, where at the macro level, maybe we're at one point, but actually it's not that useful to look at voice on the macro level. It's better at the atomic level, at the use case level, because there's a whole host of maturity levels, depending on what it is. So the first thing I will say is voice AI technology is very capable today, and people should not forget that. It is amazing what it can do, particularly compared to what it could do 10 years ago, and even 3 or 4 years ago. And I'll point out, just in the last 3 or 4 years, synthetic speech has probably improved by 100%, right? So we're not just talking about ASR, the speech recognition and the NLU. We're talking about just the quality of it. The quality of NLUs, which are tuned to specific domains, improved significantly over the last 2 years. So there's some other things that were a little more advanced, like the ASR probably has had just smaller incremental changes, automated speech recognition. The dialogue management, maybe incremental changes at this point. So I think what we take away from is we say at the technology stack level, we're at different levels of maturity, but then also from a use case standpoint, we're at different levels. And I really believe that from the enterprise standpoint, most of that's just going right into like useful applications, right? They sort of watch the whole hype cycle on the consumer side. Now, what works today really well is the command and control. And you see that, you can see that in the data with consumers. So what do they use most often? They ask simple questions and get simple answers. They ask for the weather. They start to play music, which is actually very complex from an AI recognition standpoint, but very simple from an interaction model standpoint. They do timers and alarms. These are one-turn interactions. That works really well. You take that over to the car, it's the same type of thing. It's just different use cases. It's the phone, it's text messaging, it's playing music. So that's what we should look at, and we say that actually works today. That's the first thing that is getting added to all these other spaces, like mobile apps, for example. They do search, and then they do these simple task execution commands, and they do that very quickly. Sometimes usually they do that in a multimodal fashion, but that command and control is what works really well. The multi-turn conversation, and we should stop for 1 second. Conversational AI, what does that mean? Conversational AI really means, in terms of the broad sense, it means natural language input. Speaking like we're speaking today as humans, that's how we're asking for things. It is not about a conversation most of the time. Most of the time, it is natural language input and then some task execution on the back end. There is no back and forth in the way we think of humans conversing. However, there is this conversational concept of multi-turn interactions. That is very early. It is successful in some very narrow use cases, but most of the time it's unnecessary. Where I think it will be really robust, and this is something that's a few years out, is in the entertainment space. So if we think about this in games and just social interactions type of things that people use today a little bit, but it's sort of the anomaly. The things that the Alexa Prize is really focused on, I think of those as entertainment use cases predominantly. And that's very early. We don't see significant consumer adoption, so therefore we can question what the utility is of that today. I think that will be higher in the future. But the command and control, the simple interactions, absolutely nailed it today. And we're just going to see that proliferate into more surfaces and more use cases.
Cool. I think they've done a really good job there of kind of articulating kind of where we are in terms of constraints of what can be done right now. Now, there's been I'm interested to kind of follow the money right now. Now, there's wild speculation as to when and how voice commerce really comes thundering in. And there's kind of $20 to $160 billion worth of voice commerce going to be happening by 2025, depending on who you talk to. It'd be really interesting to understand when do you think this is going to happen? How are the barriers of trust going to be overcome? And what are the drivers? What are the drivers from kind of the retail perspective and the consumer behavioural perspective? What are I suppose break this question down. What needs to happen in order to unlock this huge potential that everyone can see in voice commerce? I'd be interested to get your view, John.
The promise that's before us is really driven by the overall change within the industry to, let's say, a unified commerce, into the drive for ease and convenience. I order online, I pick up in store. I order online, I have it delivered. And that has taken a significant chunk of the business in nearly every market around the world. Voice as an interface to that seems to be natural, seems to be the next step, seems to be what we want to do. So from a consumer side, and I don't have the data, this is anecdotal from talking with retailers, the consumer adoption or consumer awareness, consumer willingness to try is higher right now than retailer executive willingness to invest.
Okay.
And the issue is of the trust issues on the business side are, how will this be better and different than what we're doing right now? They're using their mobile app, they're shopping online on their laptops. Why go to voice? I mean, additional expense. I don't trust it. It's going to screw up. And there's this whole data issue, huge data issue in front of us. So there's a number of the dependencies on the business side in process integration, in just how all this changes the willingness to invest incrementally on top of other things, the whole data issue. And then number 4, we've all been checking and seeing in the news, there's a whole lot of things before retailers right now and into 2022, even 2023, supply chain, this, that, changes in the business, etc. A quick anecdote, I'm talking to a European retailer, had been at a conference, talking about voice value. Came back and said, well, John, this voice thing is very interesting. I can see it really is going to be important, but our senior management right now is focused on our SAP implementation, SAP ERP implementation.
1999 technology project is calling.
1999 project is calling, and that is taking all our time and all our money. So we don't have time for voice.
Yeah. So, this is a great conversation.
An anecdote.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great one. I really like this concept that it's supply constrained and not demand constrained. I see that in the consumer survey data that we do. There's actually a lot more interest. People have tried a lot more voice interactions, not just commerce, but other things, to say voice and mobile apps more broadly. And the voice commerce interaction is actually very high. It's much higher than most people think. You're going to be upwards of 30 to 40%, depending on which market you're in. And people have tried some sort of actual voice transaction. A lot of that's driven by Amazon because it is a shopping site. And so it's very natural for people to use Alexa to execute a purchase. But also because when Google first came out, they had really high numbers because they basically gave everybody a $20 coupon. And so what they would do is they would just go, they would get their Home Mini, and they would basically buy another Home Mini with their coupon for free. And so they had like this huge spike, and so that like the percentage of people using it at one point was higher than the percentage of Amazon Echo device owners. So there's definitely, consumers are actually much more tolerant of the perceived imperfections of voice than the executives who would be making this available. So that's the first thing I would say. And that's right in line with what John's anecdotal experience is. I see it in the consumer data. It is important, though, that we step back and we think about this. And we did a voice commerce report. We're going to put out actually another one coming up pretty soon because we just did a new survey on this. But we did one back in 2018. And what we said then is we said, hey, we need to really think about this as a model that doesn't necessarily always include the transaction itself. Because when you think about this idea of using voice, just like you're using other types of affordances on your UI, there are different steps. So there's product discovery, there's product comparison and consideration, and there's also transaction. Now, I had a really interesting Clubhouse room. This would have been going back 3 or 4 months ago. And we were talking specifically about voice commerce. And one of the very obvious things is to do voice search, because voice search is so much more robust. And it also gives the seller a lot higher resonance signal in terms of the data of because right now what they do is you can only actually go for what they provide or to type something in, which is not that great, but it works. But you still don't get a lot of detail in those signals. And so you're always trying to basically go to what I would call the most common denominator as opposed to the lowest common denominator for that. Whereas when you get to voice, you get all this additional data. Andy Samhat at Automat really talks about this, how like you can really significantly bump your basket level by sort of mining that conversation data to actually put real promotions in front of these things that these people care about, as opposed to just what you guess because you put them into this statistical category that says, oh yeah, 4 in 10 will buy an extra thing if we put them there. So when we step back, we say, okay, there's this whole thing where there's this search, there's consideration, there's transaction. And so my expectation is that voice being part of the purchase process is going to be very, very high, even if many times you have to do a tap to confirm or you have to do some sort of other type of biometric that is not voice. I am not a big believer that voice biometrics are going to be the driving force for voice commerce. I think it's really this discovery, the comparison. And going back to that Clubhouse room, one of the things that I was told with some folks who were implementing these systems, they said, you know what, nobody really wants the search, voice search. They've optimized their website for it. So first of all, I think it's probably wrong, but it's important to understand where people's heads are at, what they're thinking, right? What's driving them. And say, okay, maybe that's not the place where they have a problem. He said, yeah, but you know where they do have a problem? They have a problem for high value, complex purchases at the point of purchase. Because what happens is they feel like they can surface the right thing. But when someone goes to buy and they're like, geez, I need to look at the review. I need to look at the spec. I need to see how big it is. I just need someone to tell me I'm not making a huge mistake. Yeah. And they were saying that's the part where most of these retailers are actually losing big dollars and really recognize that as a problem they can't solve today other than throwing people at it. And so if the margins are high enough, they throw people at it and they try to answer these questions. But we all know what happens with purchasing, like the decay in terms of your conversion rate over 5 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. After that, you're basically done. You've lost them forever. And so this idea that even if you don't have a person available, you could have some sort of multi-turn conversation that can answer a lot of questions, get them to the right place on the website to answer their questions or answer it from a voice standpoint. That could have a really big impact. And I think somebody should actually really focus on that and solving that problem. However, I also believe that they don't know what they're missing out on the search side and actually being able to put in front of consumers better search results, more in-context search results that will result in higher sales.
So they carry on.
No, Charlie, I just wanted to rip a bit off of what Bret said, and forgive me for interrupting you. I'm sorry, but if we equate voice commerce with transaction, as Bret made the point, we're dead wrong right now. But if we understand, and think back, because voice for retail is very similar to where the web for retail was in 2003, 2002. Everyone was said, oh my God, it's only one store's worth of revenue. It's really not worth anything in investment. Voice, its impact, of within the shopper journey. If we even think of the number of phone calls that are not picked up in a store, what are the hours? Where can voice help in a variety of very simple, and to Bret's point, very command and control, ask and respond ways, all kinds of value to be found there, but it's not yet in transaction. And we need to understand where it can bring value in that decision journey. I'm sorry, Charlie, back to you.
Well, I want to jump in on this because I want to say, let's look at it, a one-touch purchase. So that was implemented by Amazon a while ago. It actually really started to work particularly on mobile within the last 6 years, I would say. So we're talking 20 years after the company was founded. You were still mostly just typing in your credit card every time. And if you're not Amazon and you're not shopping there and don't have this like persistent account, you are still typing in. This is not an efficient interaction at the transaction layer. Now, Apple's really nailed it. And they already had your credit card. They just allow you to, like in anybody's website, well, not everybody, but anybody who's enabled it, you can have that same experience you have in Amazon. I expect to see more of that from a touch standpoint. But let's look at this. I mean, e-commerce has been around for 25 years, and we're just getting to the point where you don't have to type into a credit card most of the time when you're shopping. And so when we go to voice, there will also be some of these different things. But the rails that we've built from a touch standpoint, which finally work now, which you can just tap and buy, I think are really going to accelerate the adoption of voice, where it'll just bring it up and you can tap and buy. Maybe sometimes you can confirm it by voice like people do with Alexa, and that works. But I think for the most part, we're going to have these places where they don't own the whole value chain like Amazon does. And so they're going to need some of these third-party plugins that enable that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
No, I couldn't agree more. We're still working out exactly the role that voice plays in this whole kind of customer consideration journey, and that it plays different roles for different products.
Well, this is where the voice assistant has really hurt the conversation, because it was great because it was introduced to people and they said, okay, well, Siri can do this, Alexa can do this, Google Assistant can do this, but then everybody thought that it had to be a voice assistant. And a voice assistant is too heavy of an implementation for most of the use cases, because we're just talking about a feature, right? And so that's what we're seeing. We're talking about the slope of enlightenment for gardening. That's what's happening. People are basically doing these simple implementations where you don't need a full multi-turn conversational assistant. You're solving the problem incrementally, you're providing more convenience, and you're using those inputs and that higher resolution signal from the customer to give them better in-context results.
So kind of jumping back to where this point of transaction, I'm really, really interested in this, the supplier, the retailer having some friction, and it actually being them that's constraining the listings, right? The people that I speak to are terrified of Amazon, and they, don't want to enable any kind of voice commerce because they're scared that Amazon's going to eat their lunch. Now, how long do you think it's going to be if these assistants grow into monopolies that they want to be, and these walled gardens they are fiercely defending? How long do you think they're going to be able to operate in the way that they're currently operating? Because it was only last week, I think, that Apple and Epic, had this epic battle where they've actually kind of broken open the App Store and are really kind of opening the floodgates to new ways of transacting outside Apple's walled garden. It's taken 12 years since the App Store kind of launched in order for that to happen. But do you think that's going to set a precedent for that kind of open type environment in the world of voice and voice commerce? So there's two questions there. One, do you think that's going to happen in a similar way? And two, do you think that what kind of time frame would you look at there?
Do you want to start, John?
Give it a shot. The largest issue right now is the broad enterprise definition of what is voice technology. Bret made a great point. It's a heavy voice assistant. It's an agent. It is going to demand X, Y, Z that is well beyond the capability of any enterprise. And voice is Amazon and Google and Apple. but that's the operative definition in North America, to a large degree in Europe. And again, in China, you're going to put in different names. But the absence of perception of the alternatives, of an alternative view, an alternative vision, an alternative future, is lacking. It's one of the things the Open Voice Network was formed for, to give a vision of an alternative open where everyone's included, including the big guys. It's standards-based. It's interoperable. We all are invited to the table. We all have given a plate. And so the alternative view is something that has to be brought forward. At least that's our job, and it's something we are inviting people to join us in communicating that vision. Then putting in place the structure, the architectures, the alternatives themselves to enable that. Because data is the issue. Voice at its base is about user data, who collects it, who aggregates it, who analyzes it, who monetizes it. Bret?
Yeah, so we can come back to the Epic thing in a moment, but I think there's a more fundamental point here. If we think about shopping carts, we don't have this idea that there's this shopping cart paradigm. It's a feature of the checkout process. And some of us remember a time when there were not actually shopping carts, and it was very difficult to purchase. Once we had that common affordance from a UI standpoint and functionality standpoint, it really made everything a lot easier, because then you would go to a place and you didn't have to learn something all over again. It's like, as long as they have the shopping cart functionality and that same type of interaction model, it reduced the learning curve associated with that. Another thing that I remember is a time when we did not have a search box when we were looking to purchase. There was a catalog, and you'd used to have to go through a tree structure in order to find the thing. It's like, okay, I select over here consumer electronics, and I select, I don't know, back in that day it was probably like a Walkman, or iPod would have been the thing probably. So you select the iPod, and then like, which iPod is it? And then there's like just a grid that you select from. We didn't have this idea of search, being able to get right to the page you wanted at the time. And so but again, we don't have like this hang up about search technology. Geez, like search, how are we going to add that to the website? It's a feature, right? And so this is one of the things I think is going to be really important for voice in e-commerce. It's just going to have to be viewed as a feature. It doesn't have to it's not the whole process. It's just going to help where it needs to help. It's going to facilitate 15%, 30%, 55% of transactions. I don't know what the thing is. It depends. But in those transactions, it might only do 3% of the interaction, right? So I think that's the thing that I consider. There's these structural things around being able to sell online and what the usury rates are that the platforms charge, that type of thing. Yeah, I think that's important. But let's just go to the web, because they don't exist in the web. Those aren't the walled gardens. And every company that I know of that sells stuff has a website. I'm sure there's some that don't. I can't think of any. There's probably some that just have mobile apps. But that's foolish, because they should move people to the web where they don't have to pay 30% or 15%, depending on what's going on there. So let's just look at that. How can you make that more effective, right? When we added the shopping cart, when we added the search box, that improved the user experience, that improved the sell-through conversion rate, increased the basket size. All those things happened when those features came in. Reduce the abandonment rate as we improved each of those individual components. And I think voices can do the exact same thing. And that's why I'm so bullish on the web. I've been talking about this. John mentioned the gown model. That was actually 2.5 years ago that I brought that out. And that's basically this idea of different types of assistants. But I've really been thinking about the web for more than a year now, saying this is the neglected space. And it's neglected in particular for 3 different areas. One is navigation and web apps. So just like executing tasks, navigate. Another is search and media that comes up on the web, because it's a really good one. And the third is commerce facilitation. And all of those things, the voice technology today that works really well can work exceptionally for all of those use cases.
So we are coming up to 5 minutes left. If anyone has a question, please check it in and we'll see whether we can finish on a question. But I'm going to ask both of you a question. This is all about the future of voice technology. Now, I have a magic wand here, and I can grant you 51% and a CEO role in a fast growth voice first business. I'm looking for unicorns in the space, right? If you were able to drop into a type of business that you think has the largest potential for rapid growth, what sector would that business be in? And you can then assume the role of CEO and take 51%. John, where do you think the rapid growth is? And we're looking at kind of, this is venture backed. They're looking for a return at 3 years, quite aggressive. Where do you think you could create a unicorn in a 3-year time frame?
I'd be looking at fintech 1 and then healthcare 2. Fintech fastest to money, healthcare largest overall TAM over time.
I'm going to go with a consumer assistant.
Okay.
Because I ultimately don't believe that Amazon, Google, Apple, big tech is going to control that space, because I don't think they're going to allow the level of personalization and access that consumers really want. So to me, that's an open space right now. And actually, one of the spaces it's open for is shopping. Because we talked about in the beginning about this idea of agency, where we have our assistants which learn about us and do things on our behalf. I would like for an assistant to just know that I need certain types of things, or I'm interested in something when it hits a certain price point, and just to take care of it. And maybe we could do that today by setting up rules, but not really. There's not this idea of having an agent that works on our behalf. And most likely that has to be a voice-enabled agent, because it has to be able to interpret what we want to do in addition to just looking at our clickstream data. And we have to be able to give it instructions, which might be somewhat ambiguous and so very hard to do in a touch environment. But I think if you want something that, 3 years might be tough to have the best risk-adjusted return. So I could see financial services being maybe a safer bet. But I think what I'm talking about is a much bigger bet, because I don't believe that the voice assistant, what should I say? The Google Assistant of search. So the dominant voice assistant has not emerged yet. I think what we have is a very traditional market where nobody has dominance, but we've got a few that have 30 to 40% market share in most markets, depending on how you define that market. And then everybody fights over the final 15%. I actually believe that the player that's going to come in and get 85% market share is yet to be. Maybe they've been founded, but they've yet to hit scale.
Fantastic. So if anyone's looking to start a business in this sphere and you're looking for funding, you've got some great quotes you can pull off from Bret and John right now. But we've had a question in from the audience saying, they're curious to know, what do you see as the biggest adoption challenge with voice right now? I think John said he wanted to grab that one.
Biggest adoption challenge is the understanding of voice at a senior executive level. From the consumer side, as Bret pointed out, as the data shows, consumers are willing to adopt, consumers are using, consumers are even transacting, they're doing all these things. It's a consumer-driven reality, and it's moving toward the enterprise. But in terms of adoption, I don't think it really opens up. The adoption to the availability opens up until it becomes also an enterprise tool. And there's still just, what is this voice thing? Why would I even invest? Issue that needs to be overcome.
I like that. I'm going to challenge the vendors out there to say that the way to get over that is to provide a complete solution for the executives, where they don't have to configure it themselves. They don't have to take on this ongoing requirement, that you just drop something on their lap and they can say, oh, if I implement this, I just turn it on and it works. And so really this use case specialization is the thing that we haven't seen enough of in the space. And I think that's constraining the supply adoption.
And Charlie, I'd add to what Bret just said. One of the things we need to figure out as a community is, what does voice replace? Because in the zero-sum world of corporate budgeting, if voice goes in, what comes out? We don't have an answer to that yet, or we don't have a good consistent answer.
I'm completely aware of that. We've made very sure that we are taking existing budgets, not creating new budget lines. Now, look, I think we've got to call it now. That's our time. We've found out that this is an inevitable future we're heading towards, where we have a assistant by our side taking away the admin scum layer of our life. All these little tasks that we have to do today will be done by assistant tomorrow. We've got a very clear path mapped out to get there. We understand the challenges that are being faced by both the users and the executives that need to find a better understanding to put this into place. It's been a real pleasure talking to you both, John and Bret. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Read voicebot.ai.
Every day. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for the great fireside chat. You can find Bret and John at the networking area if you have any questions for them, and Charlie as well. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you once again. Moving on next, we have industry presentation on why customer experience depends on conversational automation, presented by Derek Roberti, who is the Vice President of Technology at Cognigy. Again, Cognigy is a global leader in omni-channel customer service automation, intelligent voice and chatbots powered by its conversational AI platform, helps businesses improve service quality, reduce operational costs, and support teams across the enterprise. And we are excited to know all about it. For our audience, drop in your questions at the question answer button on the right on your screen. Mr. Derek, the stage is all yours. I guess he's not there, so we'll just take a short break and we'll be back.